Welcome to Taste Buds. I'm Debra Eckerling, goal strategist, writer, and foodie. And today I'm speaking with history professor Ken Albala, author of Opulent Nosh, a cookbook for audacious appetites. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, I love the title. And of course, I love the cover because you just kind of want to like eat everything in
Yeah.
the different letters of the food. You've been doing this food writing history thing forever, but why this book and why now?
Well, this book was actually began as a breakfast book. And I love breakfast because it's the one meal I get to cook whatever I want and don't have to cook for other people, which normally I do. And so I can eat stranger things and I can play in the kitchen. And if I make something that doesn't taste good, it doesn't matter. I'll eat the next day. So it's where I take my chances and where I really have fun is with breakfast. And this book was written during the pandemic, so I had a lot of time at home. I was teaching online, on my computer like everyone else at home. And I thought, let me just let my imagination run free and do whatever I can. And all of the at least images and the ideas were put on social media. So I got feedback from my friends on Facebook, which is great. It's almost like crowdsourcing. And if people said, "Oh my God, that sounds disgusting," I left it out. And if people said, "Oh, this sounds great," and I didn't put the recipes in, so clearly I could get a book out of it afterwards. And then I went to, and what really was different about this book than many of the others that I've written is that normally I don't include measurements or recipe, cooking times or anything like that, because that's the way people cooked in the past. And if you kind of know your ingredients, don't add a cup of salt to something, add a little. And if you want more, you add some more. It's so for people who know how to cook or know what they like to taste, you really don't need those unless you're doing, you know, uh, cakes or cookies or things like that. Then you need measurements. So the cookbooks I've done in the past have all been mostly freeform. And the idea behind this one is I wanted to see if I could do it. If I could really, put exact measurements in. I did for most of them, 90% of them I did. And it was actually prompted by a question in social media of Diane Jacob, who's wrote Will Write for Food and everything, is a friend, and she's related this story of someone who was asked to write a cookbook in 3 months. And the person said, "This is impossible. I can't test all these recipes. I can't. That's 3 months is ridiculous." And I said, "Wait a minute, 3 months doesn't sound that hard. I can do that." And being very, exhibiting hubris in this case, I said, I would give this a shot for whatever amount of money they were paying. Sounded actually fine to me. I write very quickly, I guess, is part of it, but writing is different than recipe testing. And so these recipes, I did actually test all of them, and I've got all the, ingredients measured out and cooking times, and a couple of them I tested many, many times, which was really, really unusual for me. Usually I just throw things together and I say, that's good. So this was an unusual challenge in that respect, and I did spend a lot more time than normal. But I thought I followed the rules. I should be able to get a trade press publisher because I'm doing this. That's probably what has kept. I've done a couple of other trade press books, but I thought that was what was keeping me from getting published that way. And I went to a couple of agents who I know, and they said, breakfast? No one's interested in breakfast. Breakfast is passe. Everyone eats what they want for breakfast. Breakfast is out. No, there's no way we could ever publish anything on breakfast. Breakfast is terrible. And I'm like, really? I'll try another one. And I tried another one. And I went through half a dozen agents, and they were all, nope, breakfast will not sell. Impossible. And so
Wait, that makes me sad. I
it
love
does make me
breakfast.
sad too. Yeah. So I thought maybe I'll just self-publish this. I don't know. I don't really make money off of most of my books anyway. So I figured I'll just publish it myself. And I went to various people to try and get it designed, and that was a complete disaster. In the end, um, I said, what would happen if I just changed breakfast, took that word out of the entire book, and put in nosh? Because most of the recipes are actually not conventional breakfast things. They're things that people would snack on, and so I just took breakfast out, edited Nosh, and tried again. And in the course of doing that, an old friend of mine who I worked with for many years at Greenwood Press when I was a series editor there And then at Roman and Littlefield. Anyway, she saw that I was looking for a publisher, and she happened to work at the University of Alabama Press, and just said, "We'll do it." I was like, "Okay, that's fine. I don't want to look at this thing anymore." And it was years that I was trying to sell it. I think what's fun about this book is it's very unconventional sort of use of ingredients and techniques and things. This was really just my playing in the kitchen, trying to have fun, and things that came out that were just sometimes crazy. And I don't, they're not things that you'll find anywhere on earth, just because I invented them. But some of them really were good, like surprisingly good. So I was playing with green peas, and green peas are kind of, what do we do with them? We put them in soup. They taste fine, but no one goes crazy over them. And I thought, what would happen if I ground these up and treated it like flour? So I mixed it with eggs and baking soda and milk, and just like you would flour to make muffins or bagels or and it was like, this is great. Why don't gluten-free people know this? Is the green pea flour is fantastic, and it tastes like green peas. It doesn't taste like a wheat bagel, but like a really really interesting flavor. And that's true of most beans. Chickpeas work the same way, and so do, like, mung beans. You can grind up and use like flour. So that was just one of these weird discoveries that I felt, just happened to find, and thought I'll just make some recipes based on it. Um, and things that people, like may have heard of, but would never like have the confidence to just jump in and do it. There are recipes for things like that too.
I love this idea of making your own, because why wouldn't you, right?
Yeah,
It
you can just
feels
grind it. Yeah,
right.
a good
But
strong food processor or a grinder, spice grinder will work fine. Yeah, and there are things that are they are actually used in other places in the world. And what I was thinking was things that, like, you would find in one form specifically, like everyone knows like falafel, but no one thinks use a completely different thing to make that falafel, and it has a similar flavor, and you use it in a similar way. Or take something that is just coincidentally flat and make a pizza out of it because it's fun, to mix up different cuisines. And so this is a very very international cookbook, or at least the ingredients and the techniques come from lots of different places, but I consciously threw them together in ways that people would go, what, how do you do that? So there was one, this sev noodle, which is like a little fried noodles that they put in chopped and things in India. Taste really go nicely with spicy flavorings. And I thought, wait, Americans do exactly the same thing with nachos, and then we put salsa and cheese and meat and everything on it. Why not do that with these sev noodles and fried in from India, and just throw those two cuisines together? Even though, and historically, actually, they are connected in a very weird way, because the sort of cuisine of the Middle East in the Middle Ages goes with Islam all the way to northern, Afghanistan and India and Pakistan, and it goes in the other direction to medieval Spain and then to Mexico. So that they are related in a weird way. And if you use cinnamon, you use warm spices, you use ground nuts, and and it ends up like making a lot of sense historically, not just gastronomically.
which I guess goes back to your unique take on everything as a professor. You've studied these things,
Yeah,
like history and food and everything that goes along with it.
this is
Yes?
right. I teach food history. I've got my food history course, which I actually just came from. We were doing Imperial Rome today, so but it's I've got that whole thing recorded from the great courses. So anyone who wants to take it, just go and listen to it. It is the same course that I teach here. But yeah, it gives me a kind of unique perspective, because I know, if you know where all the ingredients come from, you kind of understand the logic of why they go together or why they don't. And there are things you can find in the past that actually just disappeared for no good reason, that actually make a lot of sense. Let me give you an example. Recently, I made it's a pie, and it's got fresh noodles in it. So you have to roll out the dough, which I love doing, and then it's mixed. And this will sound familiar to you as I'm describing it. It's from 1570, from Bartolomeo Scapi, and it's basically a pie crust. And then you have these noodles in there, and there are layers of cheese, and there's eggs, and there's sugar, and there's cinnamon. And anyone who's listening to this, who obviously Eastern Europe Jewish origin will say this is kugel. There's nothing strange about this. The word is lakshan. Laksa comes from Persian. It's the same word that you find in Indonesian actually for laksa, the noodles. It's the same exact word. Um, but do we remember Italian cuisine with before tomatoes, using cinnamon and sugar on their pasta? Absolutely, of course they did. So it's things like that. When I love, telling Italians, tell you you must do it this way because you can never have fish and cheese together. And I'm like, look at your own past, folks. It's there. It's all over the place. And people who say meatballs and spaghetti, those do not go together. They're meatballs one course, spaghetti is a primo piatto. And you look in the historical books, and of course there's meatballs and spaghetti. They put them together. It's not an American invention, but Italians don't want to hear that. So history gives you good gastronomic perspective, and also helps you play with your food in a way it's kind of like traveling to a different country where you suddenly discover a new spice and a new ingredient and use it. Well, you can do that in old cookbooks just as easily.
I love this whole philosophy of mix and match and enjoy because that's what I'm hearing from you. Where
Yeah.
did all this love of food and cooking come from?
You mean for me personally?
Yes.
Gosh, well, I needed a dissertation topic, and I was at Columbia University, and my advisor told me go across the street, across the park, to the New York Academy of Medicine. So Columbia is on the west side. This is on the east side, 103rd. And I was like, why? No interest in medicine. And he said, oh, they have very comfortable chairs. And he was absolutely right. And he said, they'll take care of you and there won't be anyone else there. And it's a beautiful library and they have a lot of collections. And I just walked over there and took a look. This is in the days before any computerized index cataloging system. And so I just opened up a drawer, looked in there, found about 150 titles in a half a dozen languages on nutritional theory. And I said, that looks like a good topic. I'll write about that. And so that was my dissertation and my first book eventually. Um, so it was kind of like food from a medical, it was called Eating Right in the Renaissance, food from a medical perspective. And I thought, boy, this is so interesting. I just need to write about, I'd never written about anything but food. And I went from there to the historical cookbooks and went from there to fine dining and banqueting. And then I've done a handful of books on individual ingredients. Beans was a rather well received. Pancakes, nuts. I've done a lot of books like that. And then a whole lot of editing of food books. So I did this whole, not just the series on food cultures around the world, but a big 4-volume encyclopedia that was just a monster. And I've done a few of those big projects that are like, 1 million words and 250 contributors and stuff like that. I'm not doing that ever again. but it was fun, and it meant that I got to know everyone in the field, and it was, those were very, very valuable. So it's an obsession, and it comes ultimately from the fact that my father was obsessed with food. His mother was a great cook. My mother was actually a terrible cook, and so I kind of did it in revenge. I don't know. It was like I wanted to eat well, and I was just like, my mother just did notoriously bad at some things. Um, there was a fad in the '70s for cooking fish in a dishwasher. And so this was a flounder. She
No.
wrapped in tinfoil, swear to God, put it in the dishwasher, and it came out tasting like dish soap. Of course, none of us ate it, and she thought this was like a great idea. So that's the kind of things she did.
That's it's so
There's
bizarre
a
and
reason that
awesome at the
disappeared.
same
Yeah,
time, right?
yeah.
Oh, in what way do you feel like your Jewish background has contributed to this love of food?
Yeah, well, it definitely did. My background is my mother's side is Ashkenazi, and my father's side is Sephardic, hence my last name is. Um, and my father's mother was born in Smyrna or Izmir in Turkey, and my grandfather came from northern Greece. So it's a very different cuisine than you might imagine from most Jewish Americans have you know, um, matzo ball soup kind of a base cuisine. So this was a lot of different things. There were things like spanakopita, or what are called boyus. It's spinach and feta wrapped in a kind of dough. There were a lot of more spices, a lot more use of dried fruit, a lot more vinegar. Sour fish was one of these things she made. So it's really a Mediterranean cuisine, and in fact, my grandmother poured olive oil on everything because she was Mediterranean, and my father hated it. And he thought, "Don't put it on. I like it dry." Well, it's like he was trying to assimilate, I think, very much, and thought the idea of pouring olive oil on food was just crazy to him. But but I get it, and there was always a meal of like a dairy meal on the weekend of a big watermelon, feta cheese, olives, salad, bread, a non-meat meal. So we never kept kosher, and my grandparents didn't either, but they had these ingrained sort of habits of food that were passed on, and I still do a lot of the things. I mean, I don't have recipes for my grandmother, and I wish I sat there on the stool watching her cook. She was actually rather big, and she had big long fat hanging from her arms that kind of swayed as she was moving, and she always had a cigarette hanging out of her mouth. So I remember this as a kid, like in the kitchen with her smoking and rolling out, pulling fila dough. I remember that so explicitly. Um, but of course, I was only 13 when she died, so I didn't have any sense enough to say write this stuff down. But I figured out a lot of what she did. Um, just because I wanted to. I don't know whether I'm doing it right, but it's as close as I remember.
It sounds like it was almost like ingrained in you. So when you saw the food,
Yeah, yeah,
it was like, this makes complete sense,
yeah,
right?
yeah. And there are things that I remember, specifically. And I have older siblings. They remember, and then before, while I was still alive, my dad would tell me, "You're doing this right, or you're doing this completely wrong." Every time I try to cook something. And my mother actually did make one thing. There's a kodoriku is what she called it, but it was like a twisted braided cookie, and you often see them in Greek, um, pastry shops now. But my mother's were actually better. That was one thing she did very well. They were really hard, and that was a good thing.
What is your absolute favorite breakfast?
Oh gosh, I have to admit, and it's a weakness, is I wrote a book on noodle soup maybe 5 years ago or something like that. And I try not to eat it every day because it is actually really fattening, and so I eat it every other day. I have noodle soup, and sometimes if I have time, I'll still hand roll the noodles, use my own stock, and cut up vegetables, and it just takes time. Today was not a noodle soup morning. Yesterday was, and I really like. I hate to say it. Instant ramen is so good. This is a neogori nongshim, which comes from Korea, is a spicy seafood based udon like noodle, and I add in what's called chikoa, which is a Japanese fish cake in a tube form. I sliced that up, added some spinach and arugula, and added some chopped scallions on top. So it's really like interesting. There's all sorts of things going on, and when I eat breakfast, my cat, this is Calliope, has to eat breakfast with me. So I give her some cold cuts, some turkey. I put it on the far end of the table. She sits on one end of the table. I sit on the other, and we have breakfast together every morning, which is wonderful. She's only 2, so this is a fairly recent odd thing, but she knows when she hears the tea pouring out of the teapot, she goes, "Oh, it's time for breakfast." I have to give her.
So you had trouble selling a breakfast cookbook, but your favorite breakfast is noodle soup. There's just something.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, I don't eat conventional breakfast at all. I mean,
right.
today was a very strange one. I usually don't buy bagels because in California there is no such thing as a bagel. I mean, there's Noah's calls themselves New York bagels. They're not. They're baked bread, and they're nah. But anyway, I was craving a bagel, and because I bought some fish in cans, and I was actually away this past week. I was in Hungary this past week, which was lovely, and I just got back, and these cans were waiting for me, and I thought, oh, okay, I'm getting some bagels, putting it on there. So like, it's not as quite as good as whitefish. If you're from New York, a whitefish salad on a bagel, it's as good as it gets, I think. But it was close. It was okay.
I grew up in the Chicago suburbs, so I completely get what you're saying about California bagels. They try really hard.
Yeah.
They just don't
And
succeed
I
so
don't
well.
I don't think it's the water of New York. I don't know what it is, but you have to boil them, obviously. They have to be fresh. and they can't be, I don't even mind strange flavors. I have to admit, where I grew, where I went to school, Upper West Side, New York, there was a place that did a cinnamon raisin bagel, and I know people who are real aficionados say that's heinous, that's an abomination, but it's that with lox and cream cheese mixed together on cinnamon raisin. It sounds really bizarre because it's sweet and savory and salty, and it's so good. It was just such a good combination. I love getting that there. Anyway, a long
Ooh.
time ago.
I feel like we could talk all day. I mean, sure, let's just talk about
As long as
it.
you want. I'm avoiding doing work, so this is
Oh, you're
good.
welcome. Do you have any final food for thought, about, the value of food, the food and community piece? I loved earlier we were talking about, you could listen to my courses on courses. I mean, hilarious. But what sort of message about food do you want the world to know?
Well, ironically, one of the messages I've been trying to promote in most of my books is that cooking is inherently fun, that everyone should do it as often as they can, and that it's kind of one of those fundamental things about humanity that gives us pleasure, like making music or dancing or running around in circles. Whatever you do to make you happy, they're fundamentally, you don't need to do algebra, I don't think, but you do. But I think you do need to do certain absolute basic things, and cooking is something that the food industry doesn't really want us to know how to do. They want to make things easy for us and convenient and quick, and that way they can charge us more, right? A tater tot costs a lot more than a potato, even though you can grate it and make tater tots yourself very easily. So my message has been to cook, just get in the kitchen, and the more you do it, the better you get at it. You can't expect to do an infallible souffle the very first time you try. And, but if you do it more and more and more, I think you just start to internalize the process. You don't need to follow a recipe. You don't have to worry about it. Or if you use a knife a whole lot, you really get good at using a knife. I I shouldn't tell this story, but I have a friend who said she wanted to make gazpacho, and she said it took her 2 hours to make it. And I'm like, what are you doing that it could possibly take that long? And I could not believe it. And so I said, I will make a video of my making gazpacho, and I will show you. Here's the blender. One, two, three, four tomatoes. Threw in some cucumbers, threw in some bread, poured in olive oil, poured in this, chopped up a few vegetables as garnish. It was 2 minutes and 15 seconds, and it was ready to serve. And I thought, what are you spending 2 hours on? Are you kissing every tomato 20 times before it goes in the blender? There's no chopping. I mean, just for the garnishes. Anyway, my point is that if you do it often enough, you get quicker at it, and you don't have to worry about. You shouldn't worry about cooking. You should just have fun and get in the kitchen and do it and share it with people. Obviously, that's the point. So the irony of this book and how I kind of resold it as noshing is that noshing in my mind is something you do alone, and it's something that you do almost absent-mindedly. You don't It's not a planned meal. You just kind of are hungry and you throw things together, and whatever's in the fridge goes on, or together in a way that's really going to be fun, because there is no recipe for this, for what's in your fridge. And so it's a different kind of meal, and I sort of appreciate that. Yes, people have busy schedules and they are here and there, and they can't always cook, and they don't have a family that's sitting at the table ready to go all the time. So this is my sort of acceptance of that fact, and acceptance of the fact that sometimes people want to eat by themselves and do something fun and not share. And so the recipes in there are for one portion, throughout the whole thing. And noshing, of course, you can share, but it's, or you can double it very easily. But the whole idea is that this is not, you don't have to cater to anyone's taste but your own. And if you don't like this ingredient, leave it out. If you want to use something else, by all means do it. You're not going to ruin the recipe. It's going to be yours. And I think the best cookbook makes itself obsolete, right? If it depends on you keep going back to that recipe and following it, then it's not a good recipe because it hasn't taught you anything. Let me give you an example. So the Russo and Sheila Lukens and what's her first name? Something Russo, who did the Silver Palette cookbook years and years ago. And when I started cooking, that thing came out. There was a great recipe for bulgur tabbouleh, and it was so good. It was just like perfect. And I made it so many times that there were stains on the page every time I cook it. There, with things would go off onto the page. And at some point, I don't know when, I stopped following the recipe and I started just winging it and doing whatever I wanted. I had cilantro, which they didn't have. I used less olive oil. I used more lemon juice, things like that. And so recently I went back and looked at the recipe and I'm like, really? I don't remember doing this at all. It was so different. I'm tempted to go back and follow the recipe. I might like it better than what I'm doing. I don't know, but I've just went off into left field and do a very different thing now.
I love it. And I am a reformed non-cook, and I used to feel like dialing for dinner was much easier.
Wow.
And then I got an Instant Pot and realized you could put in ingredients and then go do things.
Yeah.
And then you're rewarded with the meal. And that was my gateway. And I went from that to air fryer to food writer and food podcaster. So I
Wow.
love what you said, because it's a joy. And as
Hmm.
soon as you embrace cooking as a joy, it is life-changing.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I every time I tell someone, "Oh, everyone ought to cook," someone will say, "Well, does that mean everyone ought to play baseball?" And I hate baseball. I mean, I don't like watching it. It's so boring. But if you ask me to play it, I'll play. Sure. I mean, I was had to do it. So I don't. I just think it's a. I don't know. I mean, people complain. I don't have the time. I don't have the skills you have. I don't. I can't buy the ingredients. It's too expensive. It's too this and that. Well, make all the excuses you want, but if you don't cook for yourself, you're going to eat something that someone else cooked for you, which is not necessarily good, or good for you, or affordable, or anything that's, or ingredients may have a terrible carbon footprint. I mean, there's a million reasons to cook for yourself, and every time I hear an argument that someone says, I can't do that. Well, sorry, you get what you deserve. I'm sorry. It's like, what do you want me to tell you? If you can't afford it, then okay, eat McDonald's. Oh well.
It, what I said a lot, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, was thank goodness I decided to love cooking before this. So I wasn't thrown into the deep end, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I enjoyed it. I actually had a great time during the pandemic. Well, I taught the same courses, the same thing I did, but I had a lot more free time to just. I actually walked a lot more. You could go outside, so it was fine. But I spent a lot more time cooking, which was great.
Ooh, a lot of people did.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
you either embrace it and enjoy it and
yeah.
you have that foodie mindset, or you leave it as like a treat for when you do have time and you can
Right,
dive in
right,
and
right.
really explore doing
Yeah.
the
So the,
things
the
that
funny
you
thing
love.
also is that everyone and their brother started making sourdough bread. That's when I stopped. It's like, if everyone's doing it, I can't make sourdough bread anymore. And that was the last time. I mean, I have a starter somewhere, but it's in the fridge, back of the fridge. So
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Ken. This was quite a joy for me. Where
it
can people
was.
learn more about you and your courses and your books and everything?
Look online. I'm easy to find. I think I even have a Wikipedia page. I didn't do it, but someone set it up. And yeah, if you just Google my name, you'll find books and video series. I'm on Facebook. I've got a handful of different groups I manage also, one on fermentation. I'm actually doing a book on fermentation right now, an atlas of fermentation. It's my next book. Um, and I have been making spoons. That's my latest thing. That'll be another book, carving wooden spoons. Taught myself to do it, which is a load of fun.
Oh, I can't wait. Well, we'll definitely have to stay in touch. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much
Loads
for
of fun.
joining me. Thank you for tuning in to Taste Buds with Deb. Don't miss an episode. You can subscribe on YouTube, iTunes, and or your favorite podcast platform. And you can go to jewishjournal.com/podcast to read the articles that go with each episode. And we're going to surprise you with one of Ken's recipes in this article as well. And you can learn more at tastebudswithdeb.com. Enjoy food, enjoy breakfast, make these one person noshes for yourself. You'll be so, so glad you did. Until next time, bon appetit.